All right, what's going on, everybody? We are back with the other video that was promised in the last video about D'Angelo Russell's fit with the Lakers. Particularly, I know we could talk about the shooting and the offensive numbers and things like that, but I want to really talk about D'Lo as a whole basketball player, particularly the IQ he brings to any roster that he's on. Just for people who haven't watched him in, say, 5 years or so, and we got comments from people like Ryan Russillo talking about how he's like damaging to the things that you're trying to do on the court. So I just want to go through a couple things that he brings, not necessarily intangibly, because they are very tangible things on the court that he's just been doing consistently over the years that people may not have noticed or been prepared for, and how it particularly fits well with what specifically LeBron James and AD are trying to do on the court out there, and how he can be just like a perfect supplement to them IQ wise before just skills wise, even though those are kind of intertwined. But we're going to talk about more of the kind of player he is, just the value he brings mentally, and then we could talk about the physical and the skills things and stuff on the tail end of the video. But the thing that is really telling or indicative of the value I think he's going to bring to the Lakers can be seen in two or three plays that we saw in the last game versus the Pelicans. The one play in particular that I was really happy to see was, of course, it was a highlight play. It was the lob to LeBron James when he cut off the corner and got basically one of the easiest lobs he's ever going to get in his life. And the reason this play is important is because it's something that I had been almost begging to see in Minnesota for like the past 2.5 years, particularly with the chemistry between D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards. On the court, they were a great fit talent-wise, not necessarily as much from a thinking the game standpoint. And part of that is just because Ant is young and he just doesn't see certain things in certain times and stuff like that.
Good read by Edwards and a pass by Joe Ingles. He just snaps that away one-handed.
Oh my God!
Leading the break, Luka
Oh my
Garza
God!
left open.
Whereas you get to a LeBron level player and the math kind of becomes different. Because one thing about D'Angelo Russell, in terms of like, I talk about his playmaking all the time. I make all the compilations and things like that. And you see all the passes where they're just like, quote unquote, fancy passes and things like that. But one of the things that he has when he really brings his value as a playmaker is his ability to like find cutters and just pass people into open opportunities. For instance, like just the play where he just dumped the ball off to AD after kind of penetrating and probing. That's the kind of thing he does regularly. The one thing specifically that he's very good at is like passing people into advantages, whether or not it's an advantage that's directly to the rim or something like that. He'll pass people into driving lanes and things like that people just don't see. And particularly it was lost a lot in Minnesota because it was just a lot of young players there. I know I had the whole series of the most underrated play in the NBA. No, the most unstoppable play in the NBA with him and Jordan McLaughlin. And you could see there, like, just his ability to punish defenders who aren't paying attention and who are just like, aren't positionally where they need to be and stuff like that. And his ability to throw a perfect, like, on-point pass. And he does that, like, consistently when he's given the opportunity. And he hasn't really had the opportunity to, like, flex those muscles per se outside of like the plays with Jordan McLaughlin, and then like Jaden McDaniels would get involved in it and stuff like that. It was just a thing where it just never regularly happened at the level that it need to. And I bemoaned it a lot about how many points they left on the table just by people not back cutting and just simple things like that. And then you get in his first game with LeBron and he finds him immediately on a play that should be there more often than not, and we can get into how they can get into two-man game and like all this other stuff that they have the opportunity to like flourish in if they kind of have time to kind of figure it out on the court if LeBron is available and things like that. But that play was indicative that he's finally playing with somebody that kind of understands like how to move on the court and stuff like that. Now we saw a lot of that in Brooklyn. The reason they kind of took off Like they needed another person in the lineup who can do this, and it's gonna be wild when you hear the name I say, but a person that was very important to unlocking their offense in Brooklyn was Rodions Caruso. Now he wasn't like he shot absolutely terribly after a certain point, and he wasn't like he's obviously not in the NBA anymore. That might be for off-court reasons, stuff like that as well. But the one thing he consistently did was his ability to cut and find gaps in the defense. And he became immensely valuable in the Nets offense because he knew how to play off of D'Angelo Russell and his ability to find cutters and things like that. And it's just like nobody would have told you that guy probably would have been out the NBA in 3 years just off of how he looked playing next to D'Angelo Russell. And now you give him the most souped up version of a person who understands how to move off ball and has the absolute talent of one of the greatest players of all time. Of course, he's older and things like that, but just from a basketball minds connection standpoint, like that is going to be like tremendously useful for the Lakers, particularly, you know, in the starting lineups and things like that when they're on the court together, and then off the court they can kind of, you know, run units in their own respects and stuff like that. But that was the first play that kind of just got my spidey senses tingling, even though it was obviously like a successful play. Just the lack of it over the past couple years is something that has really been missing from D'Angelo's game as like a supplement to the things that he does on the court. The other play was just a simple, well, it wasn't simple, but it kind of shows D'Angelo's ability to move off ball and just like his willingness to move and like just keep things going as opposed to like being this pick and roll, dribble the air out of the ball merchant that people seem to think he is for some reason. It's obvious like if you're saying that, you're not watching him play basketball. I'm sorry, you're not watching it enough, or you're not watching it correctly. And that's just like, I don't mean to be like crass about it, but that's just, it's no other way to describe it. But the second play that happened was in the third quarter. I think it was like 65-60. I can't remember. It was in the third quarter, though. I know that for sure. They were on this side of the floor, and D'Lo comes up, and then him and Malik are kind of trying to play this two-man game where are they going to screen for somebody cutting in the paint? Are they going to come around for each other? Like this weave, like, you know, floppy kind of situation that was going on. And D'Angelo Russell, I don't know if he knew what they were actually running, because it looked kind of weird in the moment where he was just kind of just like circling around the right block, where he kept faking like he was going to go one way and then he'd stop, then he'd come back and he'd keep doing it. And he just did it like 3 or 4 times until he got actually off of a curl off of the screen and got a look that he wanted, and he got fouled. Now, of course, in the grand scheme of things, he ended up hitting 2 free throws, but it wasn't a flashy play or anything like that. But it's indicative of another thing that has gone like highly unnoticed for D'Angelo Russell over the course of the years. The only person I've seen shed light on it is basically me in that one video I made 2 years ago about his ability to play in space and move off the ball and kind of be a person who can take advantage of compromised defenses, whether or not it's being a movement guy himself or his teammates moving. And that was just another play where he was finding some success off ball. Part of the reason he has such pristine like shooting numbers and stuff this year is because he was finally playing with somebody that could take advantage of his movement off the ball in Minnesota in the form of Kyle Anderson, right? And so and we all know that Kyle Anderson he's very intelligent and stuff like that, but he has a lot of physical limitations on the floor that kind of caps his ceiling as to the kind of player he can be and stuff like that. So you take the mental IQ of the Kyle Anderson, once again, put it in the LeBron James and just see how that would work with those two guys going forward, because D'Lo and Kyle had a lot of chemistry like off the ball, like for each other, where Kyle would find D'Lo would find Kyle and stuff like that. And while it was effective, you could see that it wasn't being maximized, particularly because Kyle has a tendency to like miss layups, and D'Lo has his shortcomings when he's like under the rim and stuff like that, even though he's shooting tremendously there this season. There was just some physical limitation things that kind of stopped it from being like a force that it could be, like given the two collective basketball IQs of those guys. And so just seeing how that's going to move forward, I think it's going to be like a tremendous boom for this offense just to have guys like that, and then whether or not Reeves is on the court with them, just high IQ guys just playing off of each other, whether or not it's in a set offense or if it's just some freelance stuff. Because like a lot of the value that D'Lo had, particularly with Rodion, like I said earlier, was a lot of like the quick hitters, like in semi-transition and stuff like that. Just plays where you can take advantage of a defense that's not set, and you can get easy looks, and you don't have to work through 37 ball screens to kind of get your offense going, or off ball screens and all this other stuff. But I'm really what's the word? Is it bullish? I'm really bullish on that pairing from an IQ standpoint and just a basketball philosophy standpoint, where I think they're going to be able to generate a lot of good looks for each other and for the offense as a whole, just by being smart, generally smart basketball players. The one thing from a playmaking standpoint, I don't know if I mentioned this already. I was kind of rambling, but the one thing specifically that D'Lo is very good at, or he's very consistently persistent on, is hunting mismatches, like for his players on his team, for his teammates, right? I know I have a lot of philosophies about what playmaking is and stuff like that, and the thing that I always boil down to is playmaking is simply the ability for your playmaker to recognize and exploit mismatches on the floor, right? So a lot of the problems that D'Lo has perception-wise as a playmaker is that the one thing that people notice as far as taking it, as far as making mismatches on the court and making plays off of that, is the most common way that people do that on the floor that people can recognize is in like drive and kick situations. So in this instance, like a John Moran or somebody like that, the mismatch they are creating is them themselves. They can penetrate a defense and they create mismatches by being able to get into the paint and just cause havoc everywhere else, and then find open shooters and find people under the basket and stuff like that. D'Angelo Russell doesn't operate like that in the same way. He is always looking for mismatches, but he's looking for them on the peripheries or in specific matchups with other people. He's a mismatch generator in the pick and roll, and that's why you see him having the most success in that kind of area. But if he notices a mismatch on the floor, whether or not it's a big on a small, or he notices that somebody can just cook somebody in isolation, he will hunt that until it stops working. We kind of saw his inclinations for doing that in the first game, where he passed the ball to Rui, where he just had a miss. I can't remember. I think it might have been Poole guarding him, but he just dumped it off and he just got out the way. And that's the kind of thing he does regularly, and it's not like a flashy thing. It doesn't show up on the stat sheet. It might be an assist from time to time, even though I don't think the one to Rui was actually counted as an assist, but he just has an innate ability to know what people's strengths are, where they are on the floor, where they need the ball, and he just gives them the ball. I know a lot of people like to say that he doesn't pass the ball, he dribbles the air out of the ball and all this stuff. Those things are not true. I'm just here to tell you they're not true. He's consistently, like I said, looking for mismatches, and he consistently rewards people who generate those mismatches. A specific sequence just off the top of my head that I can remember. The Minnesota Timberwolves played Chicago, I think D'Lo had just got hurt and he came back, and he was absolutely cooking these dudes from like just making every shot he was throwing up. I think he hit that shot from half court against them and everything else. And in the midst of all of this stuff, like he had hit like 4 or 5 threes in a row. And instead of continuing to jack up shots and stuff like that, like people accuse him of doing, of just shooting unconsciously, which we can get into that in a second. But in the course of all that, he kind of noticed something in the pick and roll coverage that the Bulls were playing. Now, the player on the floor that he decided to take advantage of this with was Nate Knight, who I like Nate Knight. I think he's a very good basketball player in terms of like knowing how to play basketball. He just has some physical limitations that won't allow him to like probably be as good as he could be. But like he gets on the floor, he draws fouls, he's appropriately physical in the paint, stuff like that. But he took like 5 minutes off of like this cook he was in the middle of, and he just ran pick and roll with Nate Knight like 5 times straight. Like and just like it's just indicative of the kind of basketball player he is. If he sees a mismatch, no matter what he has going or what is going on, 9 times out of 10, he's going to try to exploit that. He's going to take advantage of the opportunities that the defense is giving him, and he's going to just generally make the right play for the most part. And so offensively, I think his utility is going to be not only from just the skills and just like absolutely cooking people, but like he's going to find every time AD seals somebody. Well, I'm not going to say every time, but if AD has early transition opportunities, if AD has a mismatch in the post, he's going to not only give him the ball, but he's also going to help to force the switches to get him on smaller players, to give him the ball in advantageous situations, and just general basketball 101 stuff that people claim that he doesn't do, but I see him do on a nightly basis, right? So that's like offensive, like gap filling, like kind of things, connectivity things that he's going to bring that people just don't seem to talk about that often. On the defensive end, now I'm not going to say that he's like a great defender or, you know, even a good defender, because he has physical limitations that won't allow him to do certain things on defense. And a lot of the rap he gets as a bad defender, I'm turning on my 10 unit. A lot of the rap he gets as a bad defender is just because it's eye test things that you can see. Like the one thing I'm confident that he has trouble with is just defending shifty, like low center of gravity guys. Like he just has a problem. Like he can't physically like bend and get into a stance that he needs to like stay with those guys. And like if you just know who he is as as a basketball player, that shouldn't be surprising. He's one of the like most awkwardly athletic people we've ever seen, like just generally. Like I'm not gonna say he's unathletic. He's not explosively athletic, but he's like deceptively athletic when he has a ball in his hands and things like that. But from a pure like explosive, like stay in front of a guy's standpoint, if a guy is like 6'2", like say like a Darius Garland type, they were playing the Cavs one of these at some point earlier in the season, and you could just see that he just could not stay in front of him in certain respects. Now he did well enough to not get like, you know, absolutely cooked or anything, but you can see that that's a weakness that he has. But in terms of him just being like an absolute turnstile on defense and somebody that's very harmful to your defensive schemes, that's absolutely not even in the realm of truth. I know Thinking Basketball made a video about this last year, and it was about like his connectivity as a defensive mind and like how he can kind of direct how things go on defense and stuff like that. Last year in Minnesota, he was kind of that role where he kind of played the center field role where he would just kind of sit back and just tell people what to do, and he was the low man and stuff like that. And it kind of worked as a function of like being almost another paint protector in their defense because of the way they played defense, stuff like that. He just knew where to be, and he was early to spots, and he told everybody else where to go and stuff like that. Now, this year in Minnesota, he kind of kept the same connectivity, but it's a different kind of role that he's playing, because for all of his warts as maybe a point of attack defender, he's perfectly fine at guarding guys like his size and up who aren't necessarily as shifty. He can stay in front of people. He can, you know, guard people in isolation when he needs to and stuff like that. He can cut off drives and get physical, wall people up, and have somebody else come block a shot and other things like that. This is just on-ball defensive stuff that he can do. Like, he's not going to get cooked in those situations. I've seen him stand up and guard Luka straight up and cause him problems. Like, and again, that's a bigger guy who's kind of like, if you have him on a wing of some sort that isn't like one of the top flight wings, he won't get cooked. He'll be able to hold his own in a lot of the circumstances. But the one place that he has a lot of defensive utility that was surprising even to me this year is they've been using him as an off-ball chaser guy. We saw that in the first game against the Warriors, where him and Reeves kind of had Clay in hell, right? And that all of that stuff is a function of him being a high IQ basketball player and just like knowing where to be, because he's not particularly physical going through screens and stuff, even though he's gotten better at those things. But a lot of this is a function of him knowing, one, what NBA sets look like across all teams. So like you'll see him call out things on the floor, not necessarily from the paint this year, but from the perimeter. We saw it in the Pelicans game, the last game. I don't know if you guys saw it, but I definitely saw it. It was a play in the I think it was the third quarter again, where he's only been with the team for 3 games. I don't know if there's differences in the coverages or what, but him and Troy Brown were on the left side of like where the corner is. He was closer to the wing. Troy Brown was in the corner. I think Brandon Ingram was standing in the corner, and he was going to come around to get some kind of handoff or some kind of pitch or something like that. And you can see D'Lo talking to Troy Brown. He's calling out the thing that's about to happen before it happens. I'll put a clip up, but he's pointing. He's telling him, hey, he's going to come around, and I'm going to be here, you be here, and stuff like that. Whether or not Troy Brown knew it or not is besides the point. The fact that he's that much of a willing communicator is the point here, where he's going to be that guy in every respect. There was another situation in the Pelicans game where I just heard him yelling, stack, stack, stack. Like I can't remember what happened after, right? But my point is, every game you're going to hear him or see him talking to people, whether or not it's a coverage, whether or not it's just general reminders, telling people that they're by themselves, telling people not to foul. He yells no foul all the time. like whether or not these things are actually like things that tip the scales is debatable, but it's a thing where he is actively involved in the defense and he actively knows what's going on. And he's not necessarily harmful if you put him out there on the floor. I believe Minnesota had like 2 of the best defensive lineups in the NBA with him on the floor. Like, you can't just have a defense record and still have those kind of results. And this happened last year as well, where they had great lineups with him on defense on the floor. And a lot of this is just because he knows the game, and he knows I think Tim Connolly said that nobody has ever watched more film than D'Angelo Russell, that he's been around, even though he traded him, but whatever. Karl Anthony Towns always talks about how he always is just watching basketball. That's all he does. And it's obvious on like things like sideline out of bounds plays and stuff like that. It was one play against Memphis that I remember where he just blew up a whole action just by kind of whether or not he knew the play. You can tell he knew the play. And he just blew up 2 screens and just forced them into a terrible shot. I'll put a clip of that as well. And that's just the kind of thing he does on a regular basis that doesn't get talked about. I don't know if people don't notice it or whatever it is, because it's not as easily talked about because it's not a highlight play or anything like that. But he knows how teams play, and it allows him to navigate screens as an off-ball chaser, and he can go through, take circuitous routes to get where he needs to go and kind of just use his length and his great hands to kind of just disrupt people. Like when he's on off-ball shooters, I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but from what I've seen, like the Max Struses of the world and guys like that, he generally holds them down for the most part. Like they might get some shots off of him, but they're not going to be walking into shots. We saw with Clay. They're generally going to have to work for what they get. And that's just another thing that he brings defensively that people don't tend to talk about. As far as like the fit with him, LeBron and AD as like stars and stuff like that, for some reason, D'Angelo Russell gets this rap as like this selfish player who just likes to chuck up shots and all this other stuff. First of all, I was kind of tracking this because people kept saying it, even though he's shooting like the second least shots of his career. I think he only shot 20 shots maybe 3 times this year, like more than that. And a few of those times were like in game. I know one game specifically, the first time he did it, because I remember he did it. It might have been a game where he shot 19 shots actually. But they were like losing to Portland when Dame had like 8,000 threes or whatever. This was before it happened on the Lakers. Dame just be cooking teams that D-Lo be on. But anyway. Like, and a bulk of those shots were like in the fourth quarter, like he shot like 6 shots just trying to get them back in the game. But he doesn't, necessarily hunt shots when he's not getting shots or anything like that. He's perfectly fine letting other people shine. And we saw that in the fourth quarter against the Warriors, where Dennis was just doing whatever he wanted to do at the end of the game. And he just was letting them do it because, like, no matter what's going on, he's going to, if somebody think they got something and he cool with it, he's not going to just try to assert himself in a way that would negatively impact your team more often than not. And that's just the truth of the matter. So the idea that he's going to just come in and just take all these reckless shots with LeBron and AD being more deserving of the ball in certain situations, that's something that's also just not going to happen. This idea that he's this team wrecker, and he's this guy that just is out for self and stuff like that. Has never been who he was as a basketball player. I've never seen it, and I've watched probably more of him than anybody. And this is not even coming from a biased perspective. From an objective basketball perspective, he does a lot of things that are good for your basketball team. The only things that he does that are bad are things that that can usually be justified with basketball reasons. Except for like sometimes getting lost on a back cut or not boxing out a corner guy coming in and getting a rebound, stuff like that. Like some of those things, but they don't happen often as people like to think act like they do, right? He's no more egregious than any other lead ball handler in his decision making, particularly for somebody that's pushing the boundaries of your offense. I know people like to quote assist turnover ratio and stuff like that, but my philosophy on that is if you're a guy that averages like 17 and 6, once you get into the 2.2, 2.3 range, I'm fine with whatever you're doing, because first of all, people with high assist to turnover ratios like 3 and 4 to 1, they're usually quote unquote true PG types who are essentially guys who are not offensive threats and can't push the boundaries of your offense in certain respects, right? So his decision making is usually very much able to be explained. He's not out there making reckless plays or reckless passes just for the sake of doing it. Maybe somebody didn't set a back screen or something like that. He threw a pass that he thought was going to develop and it didn't develop. He's just not out there just throwing the ball all over the gym and turning it over and shooting the craziest shots you've ever imagined. He hasn't been that guy since like 2016. But people don't watch. The Timberwolves are never on TV. People don't actually watch them play. So people run with these narratives that have been around since forever, and they're just not true, right? So I'm excited to see how he plays with higher IQ guys. Not to disparage anybody else's IQ, but LeBron James is probably one of the smartest basketball players we've ever had. And he's going to get to play off of that kind of guy for the first time in his career. And with a guy like Anthony Davis, who, for all intents and purposes, can protect the paint in ways that can cover up for whatever deficiencies you think he has as a defender, because he's still going to be in the right spots. He's going to call out the coverages. He's going to know where to be, and he might just be at a physical disadvantage in some respects. And that will be able to be taken care of, as we've seen in these games so far. I think they have like a 99 defensive rating or something like that with him on the court. Like, just the things that people tell you to be worried about are not nearly as dire as you think they are. And the benefits that he's going to bring are, I think, being undersold as to just pass and shoot results, as opposed to his whole ability to be a connective force in your offense and in your defense just over the course of an entire game. So I think I've talked too much. I don't think I got to everything I wanted to, but just basically some of the things. I'll have clips of all of these things so you can kind of follow along and see what I'm talking about. But other than that, I think the Lakers made a tremendous move. Hopefully they have some time to gel together and get this thing cooking, and hopefully make a little bit of a run. I ain't going to say no finals or nothing like that, but if they get in the playoffs, I'm not too sure if teams are going to have a good time trying to play these guys. If, one, they're all healthy, and two, they get the proper lineup adjustments and stuff from Mr. Hamuel. But that's all I got for y'all today. My neck is hurting, so I'm about to go lay down. But yeah, till next time.